Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Anthony and everyone at CCBS for organising today. It's really lovely to be part of this event, and already very stimulating in terms of community and the role of community this morning. And interesting just in terms of the comment around, Eileen made around measuring impact. You're just watching outcomes-based accountability with government, and that it just doesn't work, for this type of policy engagement. The hard outcomes just don't work with this type of role, and it needs to change, I think, going forward. So I have the pleasure of this morning of introducing Colin Davidson to the stage, which is a bit strange actually, because Colin's a very good friend of ours, Colin and Pauline. For I think coming up in about 30 years now, so we were only 10 when we met. Not. So I've watched Colin's work evolve over all of those years, and for me, he's such a very reflective person who uses that skill in his art, both literally and obviously his beautiful reflection paintings, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, which actually challenges literally how you see things in different ways. A very special part of his work has been silent testimony, which is really genius in terms of the whole concept and idea of it. It uses the portraits of 18 people who are connected by their individual experiences of loss through the Troubles. I think when you read those stories and you look at the faces and the way that Colin has reflected their pain, you can't help but be deeply, deeply moved by them. I know when Anthony was thinking of the conference and showcasing the very positive and critical role of civic society around peace, he was also thinking about the Good Friday Agreement and the sacrifice and pain that has and continues to be front and centre for many people in their lives. The Centre for Cross-Border Studies thought it important to acknowledge this within the context of today's programme, and it's therefore very fitting to hear Colin's perspective on how those stories and experiences in silent testimony have influenced his thoughts on the last 25 years. So welcome, Colin, and so over to you.
Thank you very much. As Maureen was saying, we've been very close friends with Gareth and her for many years, and I'm quite gobsmacked that she was able to find something quite good to say about me there. It's not always the case. Folks, it's a privilege to be here, and Alwyn and Brona and Eileen and Alva, thank you for challenging us all in what you said. You certainly challenged me and left me with many questions, and that's, I think, the best possible outcome of a panel like that we're forced to question ourselves. We're forced to question the preconceptions often that we have, and to rethink about where we are right now. I've got a little clicker here, I'm told. What is an artist doing here? That's what I said to Anthony at the very start whenever he asked me, do you really want to hear from an artist? But before I come on to what I'm actually doing here, which Maureen has alluded to a bit, I want to go back a bit and just give the context to my practice. Belfast, very important to me. Home, very, very important to me. I shout loudly about this place when I travel. And I love my home. And I suppose what I've done is I've charted Belfast since I was a kid. I've painted Belfast since I was in my teens. And whenever I started painting full-time after nearly 10 years in graphics, this was about 24 years ago, I returned to the subject of Belfast again, really looked at it as a theme, not only just from the formal points of view of exploring pattern and colour and scale and space, but also looking at the psychological aspect of here was a city that was rediscovering itself. The Good Friday Agreement had huge impact on us all and on society. But I was looking at Belfast as a living, breathing thing. I was looking at Belfast and making portraits of Belfast as I saw it, and looking from high viewpoints. I would always get in the hills around, or in fact, whenever this building was built, I got onto the roof of it and painted views from here and looked at the tangible evidence of buildings starting to rise and, the skyline starting to change since we found ourselves in a reasonably peaceful place. I explored Belfast through looking at the windows, reflections in shops and cafes. I travelled the world looking at my own reflection in various windows, and I suppose there are, there's a whole talk on these paintings alone. I don't want to focus on these, but these are exploring and questioning what is real, who we are, in some ways as well. I call these particular ones self-portraits because you might be able to spot me with a smartphone in that particular painting. What I was finding out about art and what was important to me was that art leaves gaps which we as the viewer fill. The same is true across the board. Music, film, photography, dance, poetry. The maker leaves gaps, intangible gaps. You can never find the gaps, but whenever you as the reader or the viewer find yourself filling those, becoming part of them. And I've been on this quest, I suppose, to really focus on how I can harness that aspect as an artist. I started large-scale portrait painting in 2010, and it's taken me around the world painting a lot of people who are well known. This is a portrait of Brad Pitt. I made a painting of Ed Sheeran, which is in the National Portrait Gallery. I was invited to Buckingham Palace in 2016 to paint the Queen, and I made a painting of President Bill Clinton back in 2018. Very Irish painting of him. But what I really want to talk about today, that just sets the scene. I'm going to go back, although I'm never a fan of going back. I'm very, very interested in where we are now. I'm interested in where I am now. But I want to go back and explain, because the Good Friday Agreement was in some ways life-changing for us all, to a greater or a lesser extent. I voted yes, and would vote yes again. But there were many aspects that I didn't agree with. One of the aspects that really stuck with me was the fact that victims and survivors were not mentioned in it, save for a few lines, which Monica McWilliams managed to get in there. And it really just alluded to the fact that at some point we would have to do something about this. And that stuck with me as I voted yes. And as the years passed, and Eileen has alluded to this, so much of the agreement hasn't really been dealt with. We haven't experienced the benefits that we voted for. And in so many ways, I think, as time went on, I realized and hoped that something would be done about our past, to acknowledge the pain and the hurt and the suffering and the ongoing trauma, unresolved trauma, that thousands, tens of thousands of people who we pass every single day in this place have to endure. And as time went on, I realized that this massive section of our community, the people who make up this massive section of our community, are in a sense paying the price for everybody else's peace. They had the biggest price to pay. And not only that, but where the Good Friday Agreement was a beginning of hope for most of us, to many people who suffered loss, it marked either a depletion or indeed, in many cases, an end of hope. Hope for justice, hope for the answers which they so dearly needed in their lives. When I started making the portrait paintings in 2010, which I showed you a few of there, I realized I may have found the vehicle through which to explore it as an artist. And my simple idea was, instead of taking commissions where I was going to be painting people who had achieved a huge amount or were very well known, I was going to paint people who weren't well known at all. I was going to paint people who were only known by their family and friends and the people who they worked with. I wanted to paint people who hadn't had a chance to tell their story and were never given a platform to air their story. And in some ways I wanted to afford the people who I was going to paint with the same gravitas as the people who would characteristically have large portraits made of themselves and hung in great institutions. My simple idea was to paint people who were alive today, but who were daily still carrying the ongoing trauma of their loss. I spoke to a Wave Trauma Centre about this at the start, and I spoke to Alan McBride and Sandra Peake, who I had known, and I said, is this a patronising idea? Is this going to be an unhelpful idea? They said no, and they offered to partner me. They offered to introduce me to people who I might want to paint. I spoke to the Ulster Museum at the time, and they agreed they wanted to show it, even before I had a single painting made. And in fact, we had a date which provided a deadline. But I think I sort of didn't know whether I wanted to make one or two paintings and show them, or whether I wanted to make more. But as time went on, and as I worked with Wave, I realized that this was turning into an exhibition. This was turning into a body of work. And what might have been 10, 12 paintings was actually going to have to be 18, because it was critical for me that, and we all know what the press in this place is like. If anything's to be picked apart, the press will pick it apart. So I wanted to make sure that if my exhibition was picked apart, it was as balanced as it was possible to be. From a location point of view, from a timeline point of view, from a gender point of view, even from a race point of view, location, age, and also the background and the actors who perpetrated the actions which resulted in that person's loss. I, in 2014, embarked on this series of work, and it was to change my life in a huge and meaningful way. I didn't approach the task of actually painting the portraits in any different way than I would had it been somebody who I was commissioned to paint. I brought my drawing pad, or the person came to my studio. They had said to Wave that they were willing to take part. Wave had put the idea to them. We built a matrix up that was as balanced as possible. And it was after the first portrait sitting that I realized what I got myself into. Because this hurt, this ongoing trauma, was much more acute, was much more potent, was much more deeply felt, much more widespread than I ever could have thought. And I realized at this point, and what I'm going to share is basically what I felt I've learned through doing this. One of the key things that I learned was that sitting and listening was important enough. To actually just be there. Okay, I had my drawing book, I had my camera, and because of the surroundings, because of the reason why I was there, I suppose the stories spilt out. And they didn't spill out in the soundbite news way that we heard at the time. Somebody being caught in a bomb explosion, somebody being killed in a bomb explosion. It poured out in all the graphic horror of what that actually physically meant. And I was starting in a very small way, and compared to the people I was painting, I was starting to experience a little bit of that trauma myself, as I was awakening to the fact that actually, as I've said, the news sound bites that we heard at the time were simply that this was horrific. I was offered by Wave counselling, and I decided to say no because I remained open to it, but I said no at the start, and I maintained that because I ended up using my art as a way for me to therapeutically deal with what I was hearing. And I poured the energy of that into my work, into my art. And it was my hope, and indeed still is my hope, that the energy of that is trapped in the paint, as well as everything else that you read into the work as well. It's very important whenever I talk about the Silent Testimony exhibition, which is what I called it, first shown in the Ulster Museum in 2015 through 2016. Then it embarked on a tour, which still hasn't come to an end. We've shown it in Paris, in Derry, in Dublin Castle, in England, at the UN in New York, and in fact it is currently being hung in the Irish Arts Centre in New York now. It will be at the National Portrait Gallery in London next year. It's very important for me to stress that Silent Testimony isn't about the past. Silent Testimony is not in any way me dragging you as the viewer back to the past or the past into the now. Silent Testimony is about right now. Although it was made in 2014 and 2015, the spirit of it is about right now, what we are left with, the legacy or part of the legacy of this place that we haven't as a society or politically dealt with or even scratched the surface of dealing with. This is one of the paintings I made, a man called Thomas O'Brien. I travelled down to Dublin to Thomas's house, 2014. And Thomas was inconsolable 40 years on from the event which resulted in his loss. inconsolable, because really here was somebody just coming in. There's no credit to me in this, by the way. I simply was just there. But coming in and actually saying, you're important enough. Your story is important enough that I want to even just listen to it. Thomas lost his brother, his sister-in-law, and his 2 nieces who were under the age of 2 years old in one of the Dublin bombs in 1974. And, you know, that entire little family just going about their business, wheeling a pram up Parnell Street, was wiped out. And I simply was wanting to say, Thomas exists. In some ways, the least you can do is spare a thought. But maybe there's something else. Maybe there is a way that we can actually start to answer questions in our own mind as to what these might pose. I wrote little bits of text beside each piece, and it started off being quite elaborate text, you know, until I just ended up stripping it right back to the bare essentials of the facts. First thing I removed was the words Protestant and Catholic. Second thing I removed was titles like IRA, SAS, UVF. I then removed adjectives and adverbs and allowed the paintings to be the adjectives and adverbs. So nobody was brutally killed. Nobody was tragically bereaved. And what we were, I suppose that was me in an inadvertent way starting to leave those gaps. One of the things that people, I've had a lot of response to the exhibition over the years. Over 100,000 people have seen it. And we've had a huge response to it. And one of the recurring themes is the fact that actually, for the first time, people are reading about loss and not having any clues as to what background the person came from, except for maybe a name or a location. And firstly, realizing that it's human loss. It's not Protestant loss and Catholic loss. And we all know that, you know, I was born in 1968. I grew up in an environment where there was a difference between Catholic loss and Protestant loss and Catholic loss. And I wanted to strip that away completely and say, it's flipping human loss. It's the loss of our brothers and sisters, the people who share this tiny part of the planet. The other byproduct, which I couldn't have thought of as well, was the fact that people actually went in and even more deeply wondered why they needed to know who the Protestants and Catholics were. You know, as if we're pre-conditioned that it's important. This text relates to Margaret Yeaman. Margaret was caught in a bomb attack, no warning bomb attack, and in Bann Bridge, and she was working in an estate agent's, and the bomb went off. The glass came in, and she was instantly blinded, and has been completely 100% blind since. She had one of her eyes removed. She had 100 stitches in her face at the time. In fact, she talks now about fragments of glass still coming out of her skin now. Those are the things we don't hear. Those are the horrific things we don't want to hear. But that is the reality of the legacy of this place. Part of it. Oh. This is Paul Riley. I went down to Warren Point to do the drawings, and Paul brought me up to his daughter Joanne's bedroom. Joanne would have been my age, but she was working in a builder's yard which just happened to be located beside a police station, and a bomb was driven in a huge truck, and it went off, and Joanne was killed. And the bedroom is kept to this day by Paul and Anne exactly as Joanne left it. The little cassette player, the matching curtains, because Joanne was only 21. So to me it was a teenager's bedroom. The tapes still there, the cassettes still there, the childhood dolls still there, the clock, the little pink wall clock was stopped at 1 minute to 10, which is when the bomb went off. This is still raw, with thousands and thousands of people who live amongst us in this place. This is Anna Cashart. Anna, again, was living as a child with her mum and dad, and her father was shot dead when he answered the door one night. And Anna remembers hearing the shots. Again, there are thousands of people in this place who are bearing that day in, day out. Maureen Reid, who sadly passed away before the exhibition was first shown in 2015. I painted her a few months before she died. Her husband James killed one afternoon whenever a bomb was thrown into a pub. And she had 10 kids, raised them all on a widow's pension. Lastly, the one I'm not going to show you all 18. This is Virtue Dixon. Virtue's daughter Ruth was out celebrating her birthday at the Drop and Well bar whenever a bomb went off. The DJ was playing Happy Birthday for her. She was on the dance floor, the bomb went off, and the roof collapsed, and she was killed. And again, the pain. People asked me at the time, how did you paint the pain and how did you paint the grief? I said, I didn't. I painted what I saw. You paint what you see. You know, there's no great genius in that. I need no credit particularly for that. They're paintings of people who are sad. They're paintings of people who are still consumed with their grief, unresolved grief. And if I can say this, and I'm maybe going out on a limb here, I've become a victims campaigner since making the silent testimony exhibition. So if you'll forgive me for being vocal about this, but how disgusting that we should be presented with a bill about our past, which draws a line under what these people's loss. How despicable, how degrading, how shameful that should be a solution to how we deal with what we did to each other in this place. As I've said, I believe that acknowledgement, listening, is key. It's something that we don't even do. Something that the Good Friday Agreement barely did. I think politically we see our past as a bit of a tick list. You know, once we deal with this atrocity, once we deal with what the blame apportioned to this, we can all move on. That's not the case. We I believe, have a gaping wound. This place still has a gaping wound that hasn't started to heal. But whenever it does heal, and I really believe, and I have a huge amount of hope about this place, I'm still glass half empty. I'm still glass half full about this place. Not a Freudian slip. I believe that we still, whenever that sore, that gaping wound heals, as with any wound, we'll still be left with a scar. We still have that scar. It will be there for everybody to see. It will be part of this place. The only thing that will make the pain go away for those people who suffered loss is if we can magically, and I don't mean this in a flippant way, is if we can magically bring their loved ones back. And that's the very thing that we can't do. And what I believe we need to realize as a society is that everything else will fall short of that. So no matter what we do to address our past, no matter what we do to look at what we did to each other in this place, everything else will fall short. They will still have their pain. But to not include them in key parts of how we move forward in this, they should be central in how we rebuild this place. I believe that in actual fact, I don't know that we'll ever get to this, but we need to be communally broken about what we did to each other here. Protestants need to be communally broken about what they did. Catholics need to be communally broken about what they did. Republicans, loyalists, state. That's the foundation that we can build a future and how we really, really deal with our past. And that has come through the great privilege of meeting and working and becoming friends with the 18 people who I happened to paint. This was the last showing in the Ulster Museum. We actually showed it last year. And again, we got a few of the people who sat for me together. And I've said about the Irish Arts Centre as well. It's being hung there as well. There is a sense that this is the legacy of all conflict, not just here. That whenever the protagonists end up sitting down and talking, which they always inevitably have to, sometimes laughing, becoming friends, that actually these are the people who are really, really picking the pieces up. These are the people who matter most in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. It's a very, very thought-provoking point of view, and just as I see in those faces again, just reinforces the different context to two-piece. So just to open the floor to any questions that you might have for Colin. We can take any now. I think you all stunned into. Thanks, Shara.
Thanks, Colin. That moved almost to tears watching that, and I've seen that exhibition a number of times, and it's still as visceral as it ever has been. I was at the investment summit yesterday and listened all day to very, very congratulatory, self-congratulatory people. And at first I was cynical, but then I thought, God, you know, I need to be in the presence of people who've got energy and who are optimistic about the place. You, despite having dived into that darkness, still remain very optimistic about this place, and your love for Belfast is still very evident. What gives you that optimism?
Well, it's part, I think, of who I am. It's part of the fact that, you know, my love of this place, my love of the people of this place, and a sense that this is home. And I think because I care so much about the future, you know, the Good Friday Agreement was for us as a society a beginning of hope, as I've said before. And I embrace that. But I think silent testimony is actually personal for me. It just so happens that many people have seen it. It started off as a very personal quest. There was no commercial reason for doing it, and there never will be a commercial reason in it at all. I can't make money off painting portraits of people who are living with their trauma. But I think for me it was a sense, look, we can be brilliant. We can be incredible. We are incredible in this place, but we can be shouting loudly about the wealth of experience, the wealth of talent, the wealth of creativity that emanates from this part of the world. But I don't want to do that sort of thing and shout loudly about it and do what we've done for the last 25 years by completely and utterly steamrolling over the top of the people who can't embrace that. So it's because I've hope for this place, because I am optimistic, because I am wanting it to flourish and to be seen in its best light, that I feel that we need to deal with this. We need to, we can't wallpaper the crack, or sorry, we can't wallpaper for the cracks. We can't sweep it under the carpet. And yeah, I mean, it's a good question, but I hope it comes across that I am incredibly hopeful about this place. I call it home. I've stayed here. I want to stay here. I want to live here. I wanted to bring my girls up here, and I want, you know, if they choose to live here, I want it to be an environment that they want to live and thrive in.
Ruth Tyon. Now that I'm retired, I can say what I think. I was at a seminar on Monday at Queen's about the Legacy Bill, so-called. And it was an incredibly upsetting afternoon. It was set in the context also of the international situation, so people from Argentina and Norway, and talking about it in terms of the 50th anniversary of the Chilean coup, but also talking about the Legacy Bill. And the point was made that although it's being sort of sold by the British government on not prosecuting the Irish or the British soldiers and giving immunity to them, or impunity as we would probably say. But the other real purpose that was stated, and I think I accept that, is to shut down all looking back to the past and all the legacy issues, and just shut down. So they're shutting the inquests and the trials and all of that. But there is, I suppose, one possible silver of light, which is that the Irish government can take the British government to the European Court of Human Rights. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to actually pick that up and make sure that that does happen, because that does seem to be the one way that we can keep things open for the people who are particularly the most badly affected victims, who still have justice to pursue and truth to find.
Yeah, I agree, and it's not lost on me how difficult it would be at this stage to achieve any sort of natural justice for loss or for a crime or for a murder which took place 40, 50 years ago. It's, I think it's more the spirit of the bill that I find so shameful, and that is that actually many of the people who suffered loss, the victims and survivors who I've spoken to, and I've spoken to many of them about the bill, they genuinely feel that they are being told that their loved ones didn't count. That actually their deaths didn't matter in the great scheme of things. And I think that is re-traumatizing. I think it is setting people back. And I think it ultimately, as a result, sets us as a society back as well. People have talked about the lessons for the future and about what does it say about, what's the message for the generations to come about what you can get away with. I'm not even thinking that. I'm thinking about the impact it's having here and now. And it's the complete antithesis of what I was trying to do with the silent testimony work. And that's why I object to it, and I'm so personally disgusted by it. But it's not lost on me that actually, any prosecution is going to be nearly impossible now. But that's not the point.
Another one here with Bruna. Another question. One last question, I think, before Anthony. That's the plug.
Thank you very much, Colin, and actually thank you because what you used to kind of come to terms with and to do something about what you saw was a deep injustice allows all of us to kind of join you in that, and as you say, and fill the gaps. And I feel myself very emotional every time I've seen it, and just with your words. And I'm sure everyone here agrees in terms of the legacy bill. But I was also struck, just a kind of a continuation of Ruth's point, and then maybe something a bit more positive. I was in Argentina for a while, and my partner was doing a PhD on the Irish diaspora in Argentina, and we went around talking to people and looking at some of the museums of the past, and very clear that was tried to be buried under legislation, including legislation to absolve the generals from from what they had done, which was appalling. And when governments came in and governments changed, the legislation changed, and they were held to account. But even more so, young people were asking their parents, and where were you? And what did you do? And what did you hear? And how did you support people? And I remember being struck, one very, very, quite deliberately done museums outside the side door of the cathedral in, I think it was Mendoza, and it was actually next door to it, where torture was going on and people were being lifted, and obviously people were ignoring it. So the younger generations were asking past generations what they had done about that, and so it will always be reopened unless we work with it. Similarly, with the fascist regime in Spain, and going back to actually interrogate and dig up sites and go there. So I think if we do not deal with this, I think we are passing it on for generations as well as it being in the here and now. And I think this is where the arts have actually played a role, which I just wanted to also flag up, because if anything is badly supported financially, as well as what we talked about earlier, it is culture and arts here. And we see many more plays emerging. My brother-in-law's one coming up in the plug here in the lyrics soon, about because he was doing a piece of work himself and found himself profoundly affected. It was on the Troubles, because his uncle, Judge Conahan, had been murdered. So this is passing down through generations, and I think it's the arts and culture that are actually helping us to come to terms and to discuss it. I suppose what is so bad, and I don't know if you have a comment on this, is that at the time that this legacy bill is going forward, Pete Sherlow in the Institute of Irish Studies in Liverpool does a regular survey on how we've progressed and what things are at. And he came up with a number of statistics, but I find that the most remarkable and moving of them, and in a way very hopeful, was that 2/3 of us, that's 2/3 of unionists, of nationalists and of other, now recognise that there were victims on the other side, on all sides of the conflict. And that's a big increase from the 27% of the previous survey. And it's just a pity that this legacy bill is happening now, as we move as a people to recognising the steps towards what we must recognise and then deal with, that the legacy bill comes in. But I think we also look to our artists like you and other artists in other fields, writing and actors and playwrights and everything else, and music, to at least keep some of it alive. So just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. We don't have all day, so I'll not talk about the state of the funding for the arts in this part of the world. Safe to say it's about the 5th per capita of what the Republic of Ireland spend. It's critically important. I suppose to big up the arts, I would sort of say, look, can you imagine a world without it? Without words being written, without film, without painting, without anything connected with the arts. And I think the power of it is that art is the one thing that allows us to find ourselves in a debate, to place ourselves right in whatever the artist is presenting. And you're completely right. There is a wealth of artistic practice over the last certainly 25 years, even through the Troubles as well, which in a very, very helpful, constructive and meaningful way has commented on where we are and who we are.
Thank you, and thanks very much, Colin, for your contribution this morning, and to everyone this morning, 'cause it's been a great start, I think, to the event, and I think lunch is being served, so thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.